My name's Archer, and I really love duck hunting. But I love the birds I hunt, and when I'm hunting them, I want to kill them as cleanly as I can. So, no matter how much my dog likes it, I don't want to chase a bird around the lake or play hide and seek with it in cover in the marsh. So, a lot of time in the duck blind for me is spent thinking about how my load and choke combinations affect how many pellets I put in the duck's head and neck at different ranges. That's what I decided to do my project on. For part one of this project, we wanted to find out how dense a pattern had to be to ethically kill a duck. So we printed off some grids to represent a shotgun pattern. This is a 1-inch grid, and as you can see, all of the dots are the same space apart when you're going left and right and up and down. But diagonally, they're more like closer to 1.5 inch apart. So this isn't uniform spacing between each dot. So to replace this, we printed off isometric grid, which is basically, instead of squares, it's triangles, so that all the dots are exactly the same space apart from all of their neighbors. And this is what we use as our pattern. But next, we had to find out what we were going to represent a duck's vital areas with, that being its head and its neck. And I was sitting on my couch. Ice cream. Oh, and bang, we got a spoon as a duck's head and neck. And as you can see, we have this canvasback skull, and you can see that the spoon is basically the same size, and the net and the handle of the spoon pretty well represents the vertebrae of the canvasback's neck. So what we were going to do was take our isometric grid and just throw the spoon on it at random, trace its outline, and count how many dots were inside of it to represent how many BBs landed in the head and neck area of the duck. But a spoon's hard to trace, so we made a cardboard one to use instead. Next, we have to find the average number of pellets that struck the head and neck of our duck. So now we have to count the number of pellets inside of each spoon outline and average all the numbers for each individual pattern density. Then we also found the area of one of the triangles in each pattern density. These are 3 of the 8 examples we did. This graph shows how the average number of pellets to strike a duck's head and neck depends on the average pellet spacing. It is an inverse square relationship. A useful fact that is easy to remember is that if you have 2-inch spacing between your pellets, you average 2 lethal pellets in the head and neck. This graph is based on the same data but shows how many lethal pellets you average based on the pattern density measured in pellets per square inch. This is the graph that will be allowing us to convert pattern density into lethality once we shoot actual patterns in the next part of the project. Today we are going to be shooting our patterns. It is a beautiful March day in Wisconsin, hanging right around freezing, and we're going to be shooting today the Boss 3-inch number 3s, their legacy loads, their legacy shorty, the Kent Teal Steel number 6s, 3-inch, the Kent Fast Steel 2.0 3-inch 3s, and a Winchester 7.5 target load. We're going to be shooting those through the Muller passing choke, decoy choke, and their 1 and 2 chokes for our target rounds. We're going to be shooting a total of 46 rounds with 14 choke changes, and it looks like the first one on the list is the Boss Shorty out of the Muller decoy choke at 25 yards. Let's put on our hearing protection. All right, here we go. First shot is off. We're gonna go down here, use a contraption to roll it up, and then we're just gonna move on to the next round. So what this is basically just a roller. So we're gonna just roll it up. It says spool paper here, under some PVC pipes, and then we're just gonna roll it back up onto here. We put 2 pieces of sheet metal over our 2 paper rolls to protect them from stray pellets. That'll come important a little bit later. Yeah. Next round. Well, we just finished up. It turns out we ran out of paper about the same time we ran out of shells. So that's good. We shot, 46 rounds. Our apparatus here has been destroyed. Did its job, though. Did its job. So our last pattern, the teal steel. I think, supposing that was the duck, it is definitely cooked. Now we count a lot of holes, more than 9,000 actually. We determined the center of each pattern and drew a series of concentric circles around it. We then calculated the area of the center circle and each ring around it. Then we counted the number of pellets in each ring. We typed the counts into a spreadsheet that we wrote to calculate the pattern density in pellets per square inch. Once we had that value, we could use the relationship from part 1 to determine how many pellets would hit a duck's head and neck in each part of every pattern. We used the relationship we found in part 1 of this project to convert pellets per square inch to pellets per duck head. Then we invented a scale to describe the lethality. If you have less than a half a chance of hitting a duck in the head once, it is probably not cleanly killed, if killed at all. If the value is between a half and 0.75 pellets in the head, you have more than a 50-50 shot of hitting it in the head and the duck might be dead. If you have between 0.75 and 1.5 pellets in the head, you probably landed a good hit and the bird is probably dead. If you have between 1.5 and 3 pellets in the duck's head, it is cleanly killed. But if you have between 3 and 5 pellets in the duck's head, it got hit pretty hard and is very dead. But if you have more than 5 pellets in the duck's head and neck, just imagine how many are going to be in the body, and you aren't going to get much meat off this bird. Starting off with the 2 3/4 inch boss load out of the decoy choke, at 20 yards, you can see that if you can get your duck's head and neck within a 30-inch ring, you're in good shape. And even up to about 30 yards, if you can get your duck's head inside an 18-inch ring, you're also in pretty good shape. But once you start getting out to 35 and 40, it's not looking so good. And now that same load through the tighter passing choke. As you can see, if you can get your duck's head and neck inside of a 30-inch circle up till about 35 yards, you're in pretty good shape and you're likely to get a clean kill. But once you might see something looking a little bit funny at 45 yards, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. Now this is the Boss 3-inch shell, which is a larger shell, and it's number 3, which means it's a lot larger BBs. So there isn't even that many BBs in this shell, which plays into our pattern here. This is out of the looser Muller decoy choke. At 20 yards, 25 yards, you're looking pretty good if you can get your duck's head and neck inside of a 24-inch circle. But once you start getting out to 30 and 35 and past that, not so much. And here's that same load through the slightly tighter Muller passing choke. And up to about 35 yards, you're looking pretty good if you can get your duck's head and neck inside of a 24-inch circle. But I think, personally, this is going to be a better goose load than a duck load because, like I said before, there aren't many BBs and you need a bigger spoon to hit. This is Kent's teal steel load out of the Muller decoy choke, and as you can see, what steel lacks in pellet density, it makes up for in pattern density, and that's why we love this load, is because it has so many pellets, almost 400, and it looks like you're pretty good, almost all the way out to 40, but you gotta remember, like I said before, steel isn't very dense, and it loses a lot of energy, so will it do anything to the duck once it hits it? And lastly, we have Kent's Fast Steel 2.0 in 3-inch threes, and this is the same load that we had from Boss, but you have to remember that you can fit a lot more BBs in a 1 1/4 ounce steel load, even if it's the same size shot, because bismuth is a lot heavier than steel. And for the pattern, you're looking really good, even out at 40 yards. If you can get your duck's head and neck inside of a 24-inch ring, it's likely to be a pretty lethal kill. Next, we'll talk about our 2 sources of error in this project. The first being that we only shot each load, choke, and range combination once, which, since there is shell variation from one to another, we would have had more concrete data if we would have shot it twice. But for the sake of time and money, we only shot them once. The second is that you may notice in our data there are some weird spots where the inner ring has less dense of a pattern than some of the outer rings. And this is most common at some of the longer ranges with open chokes because the pattern looks very uniform across the paper. It's very hard for us to judge the pattern center by just eyeballing it. So above our spools of paper, we had this piece of wood on our apparatus. And over that piece of wood, we had this sheet of steel to protect our data, like in case an errant pellet came through and went through all the paper, which would ruin our data. So as you can see, there were some errant pellets. There's quite a few little marks. And you can even see that a few made it through the sheet of steel. But if you look on the bottom sides, you will notice under this, you'll notice that none of them actually made it all the way through the wood into our paper, which is good because that means none of our data is ruined. But right now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do some surgery on these pieces of wood to see what kinds of pellets made it through the steel. Now that we've extracted the pellets, I found that 7 of the 8 pellets were actually bismuth pellets. We only extracted 1 steel pellet, which I guess gives us the knowledge that bismuth is a denser metal than steel and therefore has better penetrating power. So when you're looking at all of our data, the first thing you're going to compare is pellet density versus pattern density. And you can see that steel produces a better pattern simply because there is way more pellets in a steel shell than there are in a bismuth shell, because steel is a lot less dense of a metal. If you want lethal pattern density, you're going to want a lot smaller shot. You're going to want 5-shot or 6-shot shorties or teal steel, because there's just simply so many more BBs that you have more of a chance of getting headshots on a bird. Steel, because it is less dense, carries less energy when it hits a duck, unless it's at close range, and that's when it's most effective. So if you're shooting at long range birds, you want bismuth because it will carry more energy and it'll hit it harder. It'll puncture meat and feathers when you're less likely to get a headshot. The next thing we are going to compare is lethal pattern density and chokes. So we knew going into this project that the passing choke is a tighter choke than the decoy choke, but we did it to really find the limitations of each one. And we found that the decoy choke is really only effective up to about 35 yards, whereas the passing choke can be effective with some loads up to almost 45 yards. Next, we're going to compare lethal pattern density and range. And we got to hurry this up because there's a thunderstorm coming. So, as you can easily tell, and this is expected, the further the shot is, the worse your pattern density is going to be because the shot spreads out. And we found that you really shouldn't be shooting anything past about 40 yards. And even at 40 yards, you have to have the correct choke and be shooting the correct load to actually have a lethal pattern. There are a lot of people out there who will make claims about hitting these birds at 60 and 70 yards, and sure, that's possible, but is it likely? Definitely not. And more likely than not, actually, you're going to be crippling or wounding the bird, and you're going to either not find it at all or be chasing it around for a while and have to waste extra rounds finishing it off. And finally, we're just going to talk about some things we found out in this project. So the first and the most obvious being is that it is a lot harder to put pellets in a duck's head and neck than we thought it was going to be with any load. We started off saying, I think if we get 3 in the duck's head and neck, we'll be in good shape. But there is only a handful of patterns that did that. They were all at very close range. I think we're going to be a lot more picky with our shot selection this season, just simply because we know, it's a lot more difficult to head shoot a duck than we thought it was going to be. And now, just a special thank you to Brandon Sricky from Boss Shot Shells and Jimmy Muller from Muller Chokes. All of your support and answering our questions throughout this project was really helpful, and I really appreciate it, and it helped us make it what it turned out to be.